everyone. Welcome back to the Content Matters podcast. Great guest today. Lance Cummings is an AI content specialist and a professor of professional writing at UNC Wilmington. He specializes in optimizing AI uses for business, nonprofits, and schools in content operations and marketing. And I'm really excited to have Lance here today because we're going to talk about the work that he's doing developing AI-powered content strategies. We're going to talk about content operations, AI tools, and writing, and lots of other good stuff. So we've got a really good list. Thank you, Lance, for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. It's going to be fun.
Yes. So let's kick off with the very first question. What drove you to start working with AI and then building kind of a consultancy around it?
So I really encountered AI before ChatGPT when I was really exploring what's called the creator economy, which is people who are creating content online, kind of like this. I ran into GPT-2 and I was pretty impressed even with that version back then. And I thought, people are going to be using this in 5 years. So I wanted to explore how that integrates into the writing process so that, I could better teach it, but also, think about it in terms of, one of the things in my classes and UNCW, we try to integrate with the workplace, with the industry. We try to think about how we can apply the things that we're learning in those contexts. And so that was one of the things that I wanted to do. And one of the ways that we think about writing in professional writing is through the idea of workflow. So instead of thinking of writing as, I write this paper, here you go, what are the different pieces that we put together to construct this piece of content? And even I would say the writing process, you can think about, so thinking about AI, well, how does it fit into the process, not the writing itself? Because we're often obsessed about it's generating text, but well, how does that fit into when I'm trying to come up with something to write about? Or how does that come into play when I'm trying to organize something? So it's about kind of breaking it apart and figuring out where it's useful in a specific place. And kind of as things develop, then of course ChatGPT came around and made a big splash. And one of the terms that started coming up was AI operations. And also I do a lot with tech writers and exploring the industry. I've done some research on, for example, how tech writers create community, things like that. So I was already kind of familiar with the idea of content operations and content strategy and thinking about content distribution, not just as this unidirectional writer to the audience kind of thing, but the entire process around it. And so, it kind of clicked okay, AI operations is really the same thing that what people are talking about. It's about the people and the processes and the technology around using AI for your business. Well, we can easily connect those two things with content, right? So content operations is the same thing. It's the people, processes, and technology around developing content, which obviously now is, I would say, necessarily includes figuring out how AI fits into that. But I would say that it's not like a one size fits all kind of thing. Anybody who does content operations, if we want to get academic here, I would associate it with the idea of rhetoric. So what a rhetorician would say is if you ask them, okay, if you ask a rhetorician, well, how should I write a good speech? Well, they're going to say, well, it depends. What's the context? What are you doing? Who are the audiences? What technologies are you using? It's really the same way with AI operations, AI content operations, and also talking to other consultants out there. That's really what consultancy is about. It's helping people figure out what are those specific personalized context around AI or content that they need to tweak or work with. You can't just take something out of the box necessarily and then suddenly it works, kind of thing.
You can't, but I think unfortunately a lot of people do.
Yeah.
And I mean, it makes sense that when it first ChatGPT first came out, that people would think, I'm going to use it for writing. I'm going to see what it can do. And but it's been kind of interesting to watch the progression from it's just going to write text to it can do so much more, and we need to think about it on a deeper level. That progression seems to have gone so slow in the process. It's kind of weird that we aren't there faster and thinking about that stuff sooner.
Yeah, and I think in a lot of ways it has. Uh, I think from my perspective, anyway, has to do with our preconceptions of what writing is already. That we're coming into this with many of us, not all of us, but many of us with 20th century notions of what writing is. You know,
Yeah.
this romantic idea that that the writing comes from one person, one brain to the paper to the audience, and there's no technology. You know, the technology doesn't matter, right? The context doesn't matter. It's just this activity that we do, and we own it, and all these things that have been a problem, I would say, since the turn of the century, getting in the way of us, developing our ideas about content. But AI just comes in and smashes that to pieces, and which is where we get all the controversy and the heated debates about, is it plagiarism, and all that kind of stuff.
Is it plagiarism? Is it good?
Yeah.
And I know we'll get deeper into how to kind of make it better. But so, okay, so you are a professional writing professor. My tongue tied there. But you actually say you don't teach writing anymore. So what does that mean? Like how has generative AI kind of changed your view of things and how you teach your students?
Yeah, so and it's partly it's partly just a eye catcher, right? But it actually was something I was already an idea I was already developing or thinking before AI. So I wouldn't actually even attribute it to the coming of AI. It's just seeing how AI was working solidified that idea for me. Because as I was, as I did research in the world of tech writing, I've done a lot of, research, taking students to corporations that are, handling content at scale, and developing innovations and things like that. And it was clear that writing is collaborative. It's influenced by the technology. It's about workflows. And in fact, we've been having that conversation in our field for a while. I'm not going to remember the book offhand, but there's a book called something like Workflows, but rethinking writing as a workflow. And so, um, and that's what kind of helped me. So thinking about writing not as the generation of text, but thinking of writing as the working with people, working with technology, and working with processes. That's actually the real writing skill that we're talking about. It's not the generation of text. Of course, those are part of the skills that we have, but I would argue the reason why somebody's good at writing content is because they understand people, contexts, and processes. Or the reason why they're really good at editing technical text is because they understand people, processes, and contexts. So we have kind of the root skill inverted. Our root skill, our values, not in the text that we generate, but in the work that we do around how that text is generated.
Is that something that, like, for technical writers, I don't know, there's a school you go to or a course you take to become a technical writer. It sounds like that this is more what those kind of careers would follow, this kind of thinking and this kind of workflow process.
Yeah, I'm not sure necessarily. I think we do have still have very traditional approaches to technical writing that would, you know, that would include a more, unidirectional focus on generation of text. And I think, from my understanding, and other academics if they're watching can correct me, but from my understanding, there aren't a ton of programs out there that focus on, for example, structured content, and developing these kinds of strategies. I hear from industry professionals anyway that they have a hard time finding, those kinds, students that are coming from those programs. But at the same time, it is something that you can develop and learn in the field. But I wouldn't say necessarily that if you have a technical writing degree that you have this lens, but you're maybe more likely to have that lens. And I'm not sure there's a ton of technical writing degrees out there. We have a really identity crisis in professional writing, or we actually call it lots of different things, like professional writing, technical writing, business writing, science writing, and other names. I'm trying to think. Yeah, I mean, it could just be an English degree, right? Like, and then people see, oh, professional writing. They think people think they know what that means. Oh, it's about writing paragraphs and reports, right? But it's not. It actually, or it isn't. It's more than that. And that's part of, I think, one of the reasons why I want to change the term, because I want to break that stereotype, that thinking that somebody has when they see professional writing. Oh, this is what you do. No, that's not what we do. I mean, it is part of what we do, but there's this bigger thing that we do. I don't want to call it information and content development, but so it's not just generating text. It's actually creating an environment where content and text can flourish.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that kind of thinking. So if you look at the tools, then the AI tools that help you kind of do that kind of work, you've obviously looked at a lot of different AI writing tools and other types of AI tools that can help you. Like, how does a person wrap their head around all of that, and how do you know which ones are the best for writers, for your students, for business people?
I think there's kind of like maybe two concerns or two ways of thinking about this. There's one, what do I, as a writer or a small team of writers, what kind of tools do I need? And again, it comes down to what are your workflows? And if you don't know what your workflows are, you're going to have a hard time picking the right tool.
Mm,
So there's a degree of reflection there, a degree of analysis that's required to start thinking about what tools they're needed. And I would say for smaller teams and individuals, there's not a whole lot of fancy things you need to really get started with using AI. Now, if you're thinking about in terms of scale, like a big company, like I've worked with Hitachi Energy. If they start thinking about, about this, then it becomes a whole nother. I mean, it's still the same question. What are your workflows? Who are the people involved, and how is content being, shuffled around and generated and created and collaborated on? That you have to understand that first before picking an AI tool. But I think a lot of these companies who are on board, who are kind of ahead of the game, are kind of creating their own tools, which is a pretty or hiring people to create their own tools, which is harder to access for smaller teams and people. But yeah, I think that's kind of the key. Really, you can do a lot with just Chat GPT. So for the longest time, if you want to know the tools I'm using right now, I can tell you.
yeah, sure.
So for the longest time, I just use Chat GPT because pretty much any tool out there that's working well probably has Chat GPT behind it, or another model like Claude. Some people prefer other kinds of models, but I've always found Chat GPT to work the best for me. And but again, that's one of those things. It may not work the best for everyone. So so one of the things that I might recommend is just playing around with different models, but not getting too obsessive about it. Like,
Yeah.
pick one and get to know it. Get the feel for it. And see how it works. And then once you know, once you have a good familiar basis for Chat GPT, then you can kind of start comparing with these other models. So that's like the chatbot model. And then the second model would be, integrated tools. So for example, if you have Microsoft Copilot, you might have that AI right there in the word processor. I don't have access to that. I don't use that one, but I use a one called Lex Page. It's been around actually, you know, maybe before ChatGPT came out or right around then. And it's basically a Google Doc, but you can generate text. You can write text and then have it generate the rest of it. You can write all your own text and then chat with AI about it to figure out how to make it better. And so it's really more of a writing space, because I wouldn't necessarily call ChatGPT a writing tool. You know, it's a text generation tool,
Mm.
where, you know, Lex is kind of like, it is an actual writing space that encourages you to write. And you can actually now create your own prompts in there. So, which is one of my key requirements for a good tool is being able to write my own prompts. And then the third one, well, now I use maybe this one more. I use this one more than ChatGPT. It's called Boodle AI, and it's fairly new, although they're experienced AI developers, and you can actually develop custom knowledge bases inside of it, so that instead of using the general knowledge that ChatGPT has, you're using your specific knowledge set, and then you can actually use multiple models in that chat window. So you can actually chat with GPT-4, you can chat with Claude Opus, you can chat with, and then they have like 100 bots out of the box that you can use. So thinking about AI as a collaborative tool, and that's really kind of where I've been heading more recently. So using multiple models together along with multiple human minds is really the key to making AI work. It's really a collaborative technology, and if we're not using it collaboratively, we're probably not using it to its full potential.
Yeah, there's so much to think about. I like this. John gave us a nice comment. I found that models sometimes have pretty vast and unintuitive differences. So a client might be working with one model, think it's great, and start to trust it. But if they apply it to a certain use case, they might not realize it's underperforming versus a
Mm.
different model. Just kind of, do your clients end up thinking about this very much?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of the people I've worked with so far are, you know, I would have, part of me thought that maybe, you know, people would jump on this, you know, early and quickly, but in the tech writing world, not so much as I thought maybe, um, but I would say not necessarily, and I think that's part of where AI content operations comes in, and also bringing in a consultant, right? So, under you know, you have to have benchmarks in place, or performance indicators, and so and that's part of understanding what your goals are, what your workflow is, you know, all those things. And in a lot of ways, that's how I view consultancy is. It's
Yeah.
helping people identify what those things are. And then, you know, and maybe you need to do that, after you get to know a model, maybe you need to then, better understand all those benchmarks before you start playing around with another one. But yeah, good question.
Yeah, you on your Substack, Isophist, I said that wrong the first time. You have a note that talked about how we should learn how to brew our own AI, like not just accept what everybody else gave us. And I thought that's really interesting and really important for us to think about. We shouldn't just accept what other people want us to do or use. We should be playing with it and testing it and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I've really kind of my motto has become this summer is become builders, not users.
Yeah,
And there's a whole level of course, there's always going to be people who just use. I mean, it's kind of like becoming a writer online. Don't just be a reader of blogs online. Become a writer, producer of text, right?
yeah,
And so this is the writer mindset again. If I bring the writer mindset into the AI world, my writer mindset says, all right, well, let's not just read these AIs or use them. Let's build them. And I think there's, which can get super sophisticated if you're trying to like build a model from scratch, but there are a lot of simple techniques that you can use to really shape the out of the box models to do things that are customized to you, your workflow, and your context.
Is this where you say we should talk about not being a technical writer, but being a content engineer?
Yeah. So like content engineer, and then the other term that we're I'm seeing is content designer.
Oh, I've
Um,
heard that one.
I
That's a new
guess
one.
I guess, it depends on how if you're appealing to scientists, you say content engineer. If you're appealing to artists, you say content designer. But I've actually seen a lot of job postings that are content designer, and what I'm hearing from people who are already implementing this is that they're spending a lot of time on the back end, hooking tools together, shaping them, working with structured content, cultivating a knowledge base, tweaking temperature, whatever it is that's going to work for them. It's going to be different for everybody at the front end of the content generation, and then at the back end, and then at the front end, looking at that text, evaluating it, tweaking it, and then figuring out, going back to the back end and figuring out how they might change that to make that work better. And I think some people are maybe worried, well, are we replacing our jobs? Like if I can create an AI that can generate all this text easily, am I building the thing that's going to take my job away?
Yeah.
And I mean, at least with this technology, I would say no, because again, all those contexts are going to change. The require, what text you require, how it's working. If you write a prompt now and you're getting consistent results, in 2 months it might be different. So people are still going to need those writers who are attuned to language, who can analyze and identify what's happening and how they can change it, and then how they can manipulate the AI to work better, which is what I'm calling machine rhetorics now. So like, how do you persuade the AI to do something, to produce the text that you want?
So this one interests me, Nathan. Tweaking temperature after we get a new model. What does temperature mean? Like you said that, and I don't know what that means.
Yeah, one of my goals this summer is to play around with that just a little bit, just to see how much that might influence. But temperature is basically, and we did a show on this on Bright Talk, by the way. I'll plug Content Wrangler, Bright Talk. We just did a good one on temperature, and it's basically tweaking how. So if you understand AI technology, it's basically guessing what comes next. It's a very advanced version of your phone that's guessing the next word, and it's taking in all the data, all its analysis of patterns, and all the context that you put in, and making that guess. And what temperature does is changes how far away. So it has these choices. Some are more likely than others. So for example, if I say my favorite food is, the most likely word after that is pizza. But maybe you don't want the most likely word. So you turn up the temperature, and it's more likely to get some of the low percentage words, which like tacos and sushi. This is an example from OpenAI. Like tacos and sushis, those are more common, or less common, but still kind of common. Then if you crank it all the way up, you get some weird stuff. But so some people call it creativity. So if you see an AI tool that labels something creativity, they're talking about temperature. And I don't like the idea of calling it creativity, because I don't think randomness of words, it can produce creativity, but it's not creativity itself. And so one of the things you can play with as a tech writer, if you're working with these models, is turning the temperature to different places depending on what kind of text you're creating. So for example, a highly technical manual, you might want to turn the temperature down. This will give it, it'll be more consistent. It'll use some of the same words. It won't try to find new words for things. It might tend to repeat itself, which could be a good or bad thing. Obviously, you're creating a blog or something. You don't want it to be repeating the same thing over and over again. So you want to turn it up a little bit. Or, if you're creating a user like a FAQ, that where users are actually reading it, you might turn it up a little bit so it's a little more, a little more interesting to read. And I wouldn't say that there's a one-to-one correlation between style and temperature, but that is one way to kind of tweak it to try to get different kinds of style out of it.
I'm learning a lot today, a lot of stuff I didn't know, and Nathaniel's on here giving lots of good, kind of taking your stuff and making it even better. So it's helping me understand the temperature. It's actually quite interesting. I never really understood that stuff before. So that's kind of cool. And I want to put this one out because Rael, hi Rael, thanks for being here. Content designer has been an agreed upon term for a decade now, as is content engineer. I've heard content engineer. I've never heard content designer. But she says, I wouldn't start tossing those terms around without acknowledging that people have been working in those fields for a long, long time. So yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and I suppose that's been part of my journey, is like encountering content engineers and content designers, and that's in the industry, and then understanding how their work was changing before AI. And I think that that's part of where I was starting to move from thinking about writing in terms of content development. And well, I guess what I like about what AI has done, at least for me as an academic, I don't know, hopefully this will do it for people who are out there in the field working, right? It's showing the true value of what you do, and helping you make the case that the work that we're doing is valuable, and you should be paying for it, and you should be hiring for it, right? And I think that's one of the biggest troubles with companies out there, is they're not necessarily willing to hire people to do this kind of thing because they just see it as just writing. And I mean, and that's pre-AI problem, right? And also we have the same problem in academia. Students don't want to take writing classes because it's just writing. Actually professors don't want to teach writing because it's just writing. It's just a skill. It's more than a skill. It's a profession.
And the way that you teach it, when you teach your students the things they need to think about to how they leverage AI to become improve their writing skills or better writers, I actually like some of the stuff that you talk about where you need to learn how to prompt. And everybody talks about prompt engineering and how that's a silly thing, that we shouldn't do prompt engineering, but that's how you get the AI to give you better answers, to give you better information, right?
Yeah. So, there are arguments about whether or not prompt engineering will be around in 10 years. And I don't have a, firm opinion one way or the other. But I do think we will always be required to find some way to put in that context, that rhetorical context, into the AI. Maybe it's not prompt engineering, maybe it's something else. But and so prompt engineering isn't necessarily a skill that I'm, giving students that, they're always going to be using, but it's what comes along with that is the ability to analyze the context and to communicate to something or someone. All the things that we've always worked on teaching students to do through writing can be done now through prompt engineering, and it can be a skill that's marketable then as well, at least for now. But yeah, it's figuring out one of the parallels that I've talked about before is thinking in terms of rhetoric, which is if people need a refresher, it's the art of persuasion. Started in ancient Greece. Aristotle, people, in order to get things done back then, people had to give speeches. That was the main way of communication and persuading people. And they noticed that some speeches are better than others. And Aristotle thought, well, why don't we pick apart the good speeches and figure out how they work, and then we can teach people to be better at it and understand it better. Well, that's what we're doing with prompting, is that we're taking the good prompts and breaking them apart and seeing how can we optimize those. That activity, that skill is always going to be around. Maybe we shift to knowledge graphs, for example. Well, then we need to break apart knowledge graphs and figure out how it's working, how we can optimize it. So it's a skill the core skill there isn't going to change, even if prompt engineering does.
Yeah. Here's a question. What are some suggestions for teaching when AI is evolving at times from week to week? I'd say sometimes it's day to day by my LinkedIn feeds. Any specific suggestions?
So one of the things that I've focused on with teachers that I've worked with is narrowing down to a specific objective or use case that you want to implement AI, instead of just saying, oh, I want to implement AI. And this is the truth for businesses as well, right? So like somebody comes to me like, I want to implement AI. How do I do it? Well, what's your use case? What's the problem you're trying to solve? What's the specific thing you want to do with AI? And in order to do that, you have to break up your workflows and figure out what that is. Because right now, the way the technology is, in my opinion, it works best when the more narrow the use case. At least it's easier to use the more narrow the use case. And of course, and that's really how I think a lot of the people who are into AI and who have been doing a lot with AI, that's really how they've developed their experience with it. Same for me. It's like, okay, can AI help me with this part of the workflow? Let me try it. And so as you know, as a teacher, like, honestly, I haven't implemented AI a ton in my classes. I've picked particular places where I think it was most useful for students to understand for a particular project or class. And so thinking about what that one thing is is really crucial.
I live in Canada. I don't know how the U.S. Universities and colleges work, but I know that the professors in the schools are dead set against you using any kind of AI in the classroom, and I feel like that's really disappointing, because these students are going to come out in the real world and they're going to be expected to know this stuff and understand how it works with their jobs, and they're not going to know, they're not going to understand what to do with it, other than just to say, write me a blog or whatever. And that's not the right way to think about it. It's disappointing that they're not thinking more strategically about the technology.
Yeah, and they'll have to hire like a consultant then to come in and fix it, right?
So yeah, so speaking of consulting, when you go into a company, like, what are the questions they're asking you? What are you helping them figure out?
Well, I mean, if I'm honest, a lot of what I'm getting right now is simply like AI training, and like how to having a baseline understanding of what AI is and how it's working, so that they can implement, so they can experiment, and explore, and figure out what those different places are. I think one of the issues that often happens is, like, if you're not on the same page as a team about what AI is doing, how it works, and what it can do for you, then you're less likely to figure out where those places are, and that you can work with. And for example, if you're wanting to use more prompts in your business, if everybody's has a different idea about what prompts are, or even how AI works, and you have like this person using this kind of prompt over this person using this one works pretty well, this one works better, you're going to have all sorts of like different results, people doing double the work because somebody already wrote that prompt or whatever. And so figuring out how to organize those prompts in a place where people can collaborate and use the same ones over and over again goes back to many of the issues that structured content attempts to solve for content itself. I was talking with an acquaintance over in Adobe, and he was looking for a tool that could not just organize prompts and help people collaborate with prompts, but also connect to a structured content database, and then also kind of like a knowledge base. So like getting these three things to hook together is a difficulty, and I think that's what a lot of companies are dealing with, but the bigger companies anyway. But the smaller ones, I think, are just like just trying to get people on the same page about what's happening with AI.
Yeah, it's interesting. But it feels so slow. I just want to throw this one up because it made me kind of think of something. Tom says, I think the metaphor of AI being banned from the classroom is like when calculators were banned from the classroom, and now they're required. And actually, the reality is, that my daughter was in grade 12 in physics class. They don't do anything but with calculators. And when I was in school and did physics, we didn't have calculators to do our stuff. Like, so it's just interesting how it's like takes so long for something to get adopted and appreciated in the schools. So
Yeah. So yeah, and some people push back on that metaphor because a calculator gives you, there's a right or wrong answer, right? Whereas AI,
yeah,
I mean, I guess it can be wrong, right? Wrong answers too, but in a way. And I do think the relationship between the calculator and the person is a little different than AI and the person, but I think it's still the same. And some people ask me, is it going to hurt people's learning by like having them use AI? Well, if not, if you think about it in collaborative terms. So we do group projects all the time in the university. Why? Because the more brains that work together, the better they work together, and the more you learn. And so we don't say, oh, well, does putting people in groups make them learn less? No, not if you teach them how to collaborate in effective ways. Now, maybe if you're not teaching them how to collaborate, it could be harmful. So it's really the same. There's the technology or the teaching tool is not intrinsically good or bad. It's really how you're using it. And that's probably true for the calculator, right? So yeah, you could use it in ways that would hurt your learning, of course, but also you can use it in ways that will help.
yeah, definitely. I think it's interesting in companies that um, we aren't spending more time training how to use AI the right way or how to use it to their benefit. And you said you have another note on your, like I said, I was reading your Substack and I got deep into the notes and stuff. But I liked what you said. In an AI driven world, writers and creators are even more vital because we are the curators and the storytellers that have to weave in the emotion around the information that the AI is giving us. And I really, really loved that kind of analogy and how you think about that.
Yeah, and I think that's probably one of the biggest, especially if you think about the creator world where people are, creating online. You're talking about Substack notes, and I would say, if people don't know what Substack is, it's actually where writing is going today. That's my opinion, but like, there's a lot of really awesome writing going on over there, and a lot of big writers are over there. And so there is like this attitude of like, well, I'm not going to use AI because I want it to be my heart and soul, and all this kind of thing. And so I'm not even going to touch AI. But if you understand the creative process as a workflow, then you start thinking about, well, how is the content that I create? How can that fuel AI in interesting ways? And I think that's probably where we're going too, is like, we're not going to have just one model that we use, ChatGPT. It's, companies are going to have their own model. Each person is going to have their own kind of model to work with. One person posted on Substack, he's got this database of like all the things they've written about writing in one big database that they just put together. It's like templates and all this. And I'm like, I was like, when are you going to put AI on top of this? Because man, that is gold. You
Yeah.
have like a structured database with like all the stuff that you've written about with regards to writing online. You could do some interesting things with that with AI. And so that's kind of, one way to think about how our role is shifting. Like, we're creating the fuel for some of these AI tools.
Yeah. And businesses are starting to kind of do that too, where they're leveraging their own knowledge bases and putting brand voice on top of that and with mixing in with the AI. But I haven't seen a lot of it from the technical writing aspect. You see a lot of it in marketing, you see a lot of it in sales with, their kind of one-to-one emails and messaging. but I haven't heard a lot about technical documentation teams kind of adapting their processes in the same way.
Yeah, well, I think, as these bigger companies discover that dumping all their content into an AI model isn't necessarily going to get them the results that they're looking for, they're gonna, they're going to come to the deck writers and be like, okay, well, what's wrong here? And be like, well, you didn't use our structured content, kind of thing. Or,
Yeah.
we've been trying to convince you to structure your content for, for years now. Well, that's why it's not working, kind of thing. And because it's a lot of work, right? So that person that created that database, I mean, they've been writing that stuff for years. So it's not something you can just, I'm going to create an AI writing, chat bot. You're going to have to spend some time creating that content.
Yeah. So you're working on a one-to-one AI consulting prototype. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so just playing around. I'm doing a lot of like one-on-one consultancies this summer, and just one of the aspects of AI operations would be not just using AI, but connecting AI to different tools, as workflows, AI workflows, basically, and so playing around with how to, and I've played around with it in my teaching a little bit as well. But for example, thinking about all those administrative tasks that you have to do that maybe don't need, that can be done by AI and don't need like a ton of oversight by yourself. So for example, when when I have a when somebody signs up for a consultancy, I have a form. They fill it out, all the concerns they have, their approach, their experience. Well, what is that? That's context for the AI. So send that context, and you can automatically do this with tools like Zapier or Make. I use Make, but you can send that to AI. It can give you a summary or an analysis of it. That's where you write your prompt. So sometimes those prompts are invisible, but you write your prompt exactly what you want. It shoots you an email or creates a calendar invite, puts that information in there, creates an agenda, and then you meet with them. And if you and you can record if you can get a transcript of the meeting, you can send that to AI, and it'll give a summary, give you the action bullet points. Send out an email to the client or the person, and you can do that a lot faster than if you were just doing that yourself. So not just making things faster, but actually, I would say adding value to the process. So I'm pretty busy this summer. I'm not sure if I'd write summaries if I didn't have AI.
Yeah.
But I haven't actually put together the whole prototype, but I was playing around with how that might how AI might use that context in different ways. So it's not all linked up, but and I would say it's a prototype that people build themselves, not necessarily like, oh, I'm going to build this app. But a lot of the AI apps that people are selling now, that's basically all it is. They're taking the AI model and they're connecting it in different ways and adding their prompts. That's all things anybody can do on their own for pretty minimal cost.
Yeah. I love it. And I've been thinking of a marketing version of that, which I'm kind of trying to put together myself. So I really liked it when I was reading about what you're doing. Okay. So you have an AI content operations course on your Substack. What kind of stuff do you talk about in that?
Yeah, so I'm sorry to say that I haven't added to it as much this summer as I wanted to, but it is an ongoing thing I'm trying to add to. Kind of spinning off though from a course that I did for Firehead Digital Communications way early on. I spent a lot. Was it last fall? I'm not sure, but it's a video course on structuring prompts, but it kind of turned into like a prompt operation course. So trying to not just learning how to prompt or getting these magical prompts, but how to understand, how to analyze and understand your processes, and then create a plan for your team to implement for a specific use case for, a prompt library, that kind of thing. So if you want a complete course, you can check out Firehead. But then But one of my goals, though, is to make it, accessible to a broader set, not just tech writers, on Substack, and to maybe hash out those a little bit more. I'm constantly like expanding my ideas. So like I recently made a post on machine rhetorics, which actually could be a correlate to AI operations, but thinking about the ways that we persuade AI, which prompt engineering is only one of them. Structured content would be another one. Creating knowledge graphs would be another one. Fine tuning. And so kind of exploring those, not just as skills, but actually rhetorical approaches for shaping the content. And, from a rhetorical standpoint, we often think about content, it's shaping our world, right? So there's the objective world, but a lot of the way that we understand and perceive the objective world is through content, things that we've digested or read. And so part of the way that we shape the world is through our writing. Well, now part of the way we're going to shape the world is probably going to be building AIs.
Yeah, definitely. This has been a really great conversation. We could probably talk for a lot longer. I think I've kept you longer here than I've kept most of my guests.
Yeah.
Lots of interesting stuff. I've got one last question for you, which I kind of just like to ask my guests, kind of something offbeat at the end of every conversation. If you never got into AI, what kind of stuff do you think you would be researching and thinking about right now?
Oh, that's an easy one.
Sure. I try to
AI,
make it complicated.
AI is my side project. It turned into it's kind of turned into my main thing. But so I would be researching and writing about the creator economy. And if you don't know what if people don't know what the creator economy is, you certainly have experienced it, but it's basically people who are creating content online direct to audiences, or I should say useful content direct to audiences, and often getting paid for it, many of them making a living off of it. This boomed during COVID for, I think, obvious reasons. People were at home and they started creating more content, and then they realized people are paying for it, and it's gone up 50% each. But I kind of see the creator economy. I always think through terms of rhetoric, right? So the creator economy, in a lot of ways, in some ways, is more revolutionary or just as revolutionary as AI. It's just that we don't talk about it in those terms. That our ability to reach audiences without publishers and lots of technology is actually pretty great. And certainly combined with AI is a pretty interesting idea. But I would be exploring particularly ethos, which would be how we portray ourselves online, how we build credibility with our audiences. I actually think the creator economy, and you have to make a distinction from influencers who are basically selling things based on their popularity or whatever, but people who are actually creating content that people are using. And but a lot of the successful writers, it's not about the content. Actually, people aren't paying for the content because they are giving the content for free. What they're paying for is the community around the content, access to the writer, and a lot of that's driven by their ethos or the way that they portray themselves online. And actually that kind of ties to AI, because as AI becomes integrated into the creation process, then the question becomes, how do you create that credibility when you're using AI? How do you be authentic? Because one of the attributes of the creator economy is authenticity. Like if you're not being authentic, you're generally, or at least the most successful ones that I've seen have been authentic. So when they make mistakes in a YouTube video, they keep them in, right? Like, and it's not like maybe their work gets more and more polished as they go. But it's not necessarily the thing that has to happen for it to be successful. It's about them being themselves, online. And so it does still connect to AI in that sense. How do we maintain that kind of connection in an AI world? I actually think like this kind of goes back to this my ICE office term, in that we're entering a new era where rhetoric is even, is going to flourish. It's going to be even more important. I would even call creators rhetorers. Back in the ancient Greece, the writers were the speech makers. They were the one moving and shaking things, right, with their speeches. Well, today I think it's the creators, and it's changing the way people interact with content, and even business. And I would say that corporations don't just need to understand AI. I think they need to understand how the creator economy is changing people's expectations around content and around interactions, and 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 alter the way that they're thinking about those things in that context. So, in my opinion, like, it's not just about AI; it's actually also about the creator economy.
That's like a whole other topic and
Yeah.
discussion in and of itself. It's just huge. Thank you very much, Lance, for being here today. I really appreciate it. This is great. I learned some really good new things that I'm going to go away and look up and learn more about now. So that's great.
Awesome. Thanks for
Right.
having me.
Thank you. And thank you to Ingenix, who is the sponsor of the Content Matters podcast. Ingenix is a leading player in the field of content management and customer experience for the last 20 years or more. Lots of digital experience solutions to customers worldwide, secure portals, documentation and knowledge base hubs, web experience, and customer self-service experience. You can learn more about Ingenix at ingenix.com. I would ask you to go over there and subscribe to our newsletter so that I can let you know about all kinds of new podcast guests coming up. So we've got some great stuff for ending up the end of the year. And I'm going to have some news about the podcast next time we're on. So hopefully you'll tune in for that too. So that's it for the day. Thank you, everyone.